Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
And good Tuesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 19th of August, and you know the spiel by now. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your latest weather information, whether you're in the north, the south, the interior, the west coast, wherever you go. You can get to weather information on your NOAA Weather Radio or by heading to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. If you do it on your phone, it should be mobile friendly as well, so it should load a lot faster and go fairly quick and get you to where you need to be on your forecast information. The weather info line, 800-472-0391. Find us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube during the day. If you'd like to get a sneak peek at what we're going to talk about, check out the daily map briefing that we give you each day about 4 o'clock or so. It should load up to YouTube, and you can find that also on Twitter from NWS Anchorage and NWS Fairbanks. Hazardous weather situation, not a whole lot going on with one exception. Around the Kenai River, we are seeing some of the water levels recede just a little bit, but we still expect some higher levels of water as we go into the next 2 days or so. So until about Thursday now at 10:15, Kenai River below Ski Lac Lake should remain a little bit elevated, so a flood advisory remains in effect for that area. Otherwise, widely scattered storms for the interior and west expected again tomorrow. We're seeing some of those pop up around south central as well this evening, thanks to a decent amount of daytime heating. Troublesome remains of sea ice continue to float very close to Prudhoe Bay. We understand that is impacting a little bit of traffic in that area. And a slow-moving low is just creeping eastward. That's around Attu right now. We'll take a look at that on the surface chart here in just a few minutes. In the meantime, here's a look at your satellite picture. You can see a wealth of cloud cover across the Yukon being pushed eastward as a trough moves east in the upper atmosphere. The next storm out across Attu is just slowly moving eastward. We'll see the clouds move on, but the actual disturbance itself probably won't be moving very quickly thanks to high pressure setting up across the eastern Bering Sea. And that's been responsible for a wealth of fog across the Bering. As we look at it with the visible satellite picture, we'll key in on some of those areas that are seeing the fog, like Unalaska and Dutch Harbor up around Kotzebue Sound and Kivalina itself. And some areas across the inner waterways of southeastern Alaska likely see some poor visibility as we start the morning once again, probably a lot like what you experienced earlier this morning. Now, all the rough-looking satellite coverage here that we see in white across the interior and south central, all of that is convective weather. That is upward-moving air, developing clouds, bubbling those up into those cotton ball shapes or even more into towers, and in some cases thunderstorms. And we see that especially across the middle Yukon Valley here below the Tanana, and also across the Brooks Range slopes facing southward around Arctic Village and around the Chugach and the Kenai Mountains and the Talkeetna. A lot of places today across Alaska just seeing that vertical ascending air as developing showers and storms across the region. As of about 3 o'clock, most of that focus was northward, but we were starting to see some showers across the Chugach just about 30 to 40 minutes ago. Out across the west, not a whole lot of precipitation noted by any weather sensors just yet, but we are seeing some fog, which is fairly dense out around Attu by late afternoon. High pressure also producing more of a north-northeasterly flow coming into parts of Dutch Harbor, with that blocking in that moisture right up against the higher terrain of the island. Fog was noted there around Dutch Harbor and Unalaska, some showers around Bristol Bay, and also across the interior. Watch for more of that again in all those little places that have that ripply appearance to the satellite, which again is across the interior, south central, and certainly a lot of the west, even some parts of the higher terrain of southeastern Alaska, looking at some of that right now. Tonight's forecast shows the predominant areas of precipitation will be out across the central and western chain, a 1,005 millibar low. Not terribly strong, is drawing up that southerly flow across Adak tonight. Look for some areas of more of a southerly flow to bring some rainfall to the region, but again, the front is not terribly strong, and over the next couple days, it's really going to try and fall apart fairly easily. High pressure across extreme southwestern parts of Yukon will keep mainly a clear sky to most of the areas above southeast but at the surface, fog is a little bit more likely, especially in the inner waterways once again. So watch for that if you're heading out on the water tonight or early tomorrow morning. Low pressure across the southern Gulf is fairly weak. This is moving eastward. Most of the rainfall should stay well south of southeastern Alaska. Showers and periods of rain continue across the middle Yukon and the north and western parts of the Alaska Range, the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, with high pressure across the coastal plain. Not only is it keeping that rotting ice in place just offshore of Prudhoe Bay, but it's also going to lock in some poor visibility and fog across the coastline. That should continue tomorrow as well. Going into Wednesday, showers and thunderstorms expected mainly north of the Alaska Range and on either side of the Yukon Valley. Across the Seward Peninsula, you might hear the rumble of thunder there. Some of that could be fairly close. And remember your lightning safety rules. When thunder roars, go indoors. You need to wait about 30 minutes until the last time you've seen the lightning or heard the thunder, and then go outside and check one more time. But again, if you are within about 10 to 12 miles of a thunderstorm, that is certainly within striking distance of that lightning, and a good time to seek shelter inside, away from windows and doors when that happens. Low pressure across the western Aleutians, not really moving quickly eastward at all. In fact, the frontal boundary is just kind of winding in on itself, and as it does so, that boundary itself, or the leading edge of that air mass change, is falling apart. High pressure across the western Gulf at 1,022 millibars, breaking apart clouds for Kodiak tomorrow. Southeast still enjoying a fair weather today, and a good part of the Copper River Basin, Prince William Sound, and south central Alaska should enjoy a little more sunshine on top of today. Coastal plains still looking at fog across the Arctic tomorrow and into Thursday, with fewer thunderstorms expected on Thursday. Look for more sunshine in its wake around the middle and lower Yukon Valley. High pressure up around St. Lawrence Island at 1,025 millibars. Low pressure also working in from the south and west into the western Gulf by the end of Thursday. This may try and make a run toward the northern Gulf as we get into Friday and Saturday. We'll have to see just which way high pressure decides to move. Right now it is kind of holding that back across the central Gulf. Southeast still enjoying fair weather, and out across the west, clouds slowly moving eastward, centered up around that low pressure system that's just barely hanging on with the front. Chances are that will reform by the end of the week. High pressure just west of the Seward Peninsula will likely create some showers across the western Brooks Range and parts of Kotzebue Sound, and fog again continues for the Arctic coast. Temperatures today were in the 50s and 60s across a good part of southeast. Around Sitka, we saw temperatures in the lower 60s. Port Alexander around 68, Juneau near 63, Yakutat 58. Some parts of the southern inner waterways around the Dixon entrance out toward Ketchikan, Annette, and Metlakatla. Also temperatures creeping up toward that 70-degree mark. Prince William Sound in the upper 50s and lower 60s. Homer and Seward both in the 60s today. Kenai, a mild day. Anchorage 67, 65 in Talkeetna. Glen Allen was in the lower 60s, 58 around Fort Greely, 62 in Fairbanks, around 58 in Healy today. Tanana, lower 60s. Fort Yukon 59, Arctic Village 57, Ambler and Bettles both in the mid to upper 50s. 30s and 40s for the Arctic coast. Barrow was 39, about the same in Kaktovik, now reporting once again. We like to see that. And lower 50s as you get out toward Point Hope and Point Lay. 55 for Kivalina, 57 in Kotzebue, Shishmaref, 54. Mid-50s for Nome today, just down the road, 64 degrees. As you get out toward Golovin, temperatures actually made it into the lower 70s this afternoon. 50s and 60s for Norton Sound. McGrath was in the lower 60s. Bethel 59. Around the YK coastline, temps were generally just below that 60-degree mark. The Pribilofs, once again, fairly mild in the upper 50s. The Alaska Peninsula saw some hot and cool spots, but you didn't see anything really cool until you got out to Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, and you can pretty much write that one off to fog. 49 degrees this afternoon with 60 out in Kodiak, and central and western Aleutians were in the lower to mid-50s this afternoon. Now overnight, look for temperatures in the 40s and 50s for a good part of the interior, southwest, and the Alaska Peninsula. 50 in Kodiak, about the same for Adak and Atka. Nome 45, Barrow looking at 38. Fairbanks in the middle Tanana Valley, generally in the mid-40s, south central, lower 50s, and southeast, upper 40s and lower 50s once again. High temperatures tomorrow will soar into the lower 70s for the Yukon Flats, Eagle, and close to Northway. As you get into Fairbanks, temperatures will probably hover fairly close to 70 degrees. Upper 40s to low 50s for the Arctic coast. Barrow could reach 50 degrees tomorrow afternoon with Nome at 55. The lower Yukon Valley and the Kuskokwim Valley, probably lower to mid-60s. Bristol Bay, upper 60s for you. The Alaska Peninsula, mid to upper 50s with Kodiak at 64. St. Paul 52, and the central and western chain in the lower 50s with Dutch Harbor and Alaska around 58. Flying weather shows IFR conditions will prevail across the Arctic coast for the Chukchi and Beaufort Seas. Watch for that dense fog to impact flying right off the coastline. Right up next to the coast, it will see a quick transition to MVFR, maybe even VFR where you're going. Scattered showers and thunderstorms across the Yukon Valley and generally north of the Alaska Range, with MVFR on the west side of the Alaska Range there and north of Windy and Rainy Pass. Out across the Bering, MVFR conditions over most of the water. One exception could be Bristol Bay, and IFR generally from the central chain to the west, and also out over the Gulf, with southeast not being impacted, except in the morning again if you're flying over the water. Now, pass conditions. Anaktuvuk Pass, expect VFR. Showers and thunderstorms may be possible around the mountains there, especially on the south-facing slopes. Again, otherwise VFR. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to see pretty good visibility there, but on the western side, watch for thunderstorms to develop during the day. Randy Pass, we could see showers and storms there. Windy Pass, we expect to call VFR through most of the day. Isabel Pass should be visual flight rule. Mentasta Pass looks to be good for visibility tomorrow. Tanita Pass, we expect VFR conditions there. Portage Pass looks like a pretty smooth weather day there. And Chilkoot and White Pass at this point, VFR conditions. But again, out over the water in southeast, expect probably IFR thanks to fog in the morning. Freezing levels anywhere from 8 to about 12,000 feet out over the Gulf and southeastern Alaska. We've got a cold pocket out across the Bering. Levels drop to about 6,000 feet there, and that level probably doesn't improve until you get into the interior, where we'll see anywhere from 6 to about 8,000 feet for freezing lines there. Icing potential, widely scattered to scattered storms are possible, and again that implies icing, turbulence, and poor visibility at times. Above 10,000 feet across the Seward Peninsula and into the middle Yukon Valley, you could expect some light to isolated moderate rime icing there, and above 12,000 feet out across Adak and northward into the western Bering. Most other areas should not have a sizable icing threat throughout the day. The jet stream potential shows low pressure dropping across the western Bering Sea. The main core of the jet is still well south and over the Gulf of Alaska and into the central and western Pacific. We still have a weak circulation here, though, across the western Brooks Range, and that is driving just a real quick little burst of wind across the northern parts of the Yukon Delta and Norton Sound. And what that's doing to us below is stirring up those thunderstorms and helping to give a little bit of rising motion to the air beneath it. And with the incoming solar radiation, sunshine hitting the earth, warming things up, that certainly wants to start those bubbles going. This kind of adds a little bit of extra oomph to it. So not terribly powerful, but certainly something that is stirring the air up where we all live. Out across the east, high pressures in command of the Yukon, and we see low pressure taking back the reins across the Northwest Territories and a good part of Canada, with onshore flow hitting pretty hard across the Pacific Northwest, around 80 knots. At 9,000 feet, low pressure sitting across southeast. Winds are very light across southeast right now and coming offshore. They're not terribly strong crossing over Prince William Sound or into the Gulf. They do pick up over the water a little bit. Southerly flow crossing into Bristol Bay and around the Pribilofs between 10 and 20 knots. The fastest moving winds out across the central and western chain reach up to about 40 knots coming across Adak and Atka. More of a southwesterly and light flow coming in across the Seward Peninsula and the Brooks Range and the Arctic coast, as little as 5 knots to as high as 15 knots. At 3,000 feet, wind speeds remain very light. High pressures anchored across the Yukon Delta, and you can see more of a north-northeasterly flow coming offshore through Bristol Bay at 10 knots. A very light northerly flow coming over Prince William Sound and moving into the Gulf around 5 to 15 knots, and very light northwesterlies across southeast at 5 knots. The wind speeds for most of Alaska are very light. Out across the west, a little bit more control from that low pressure system means a south and southwesterly flow for the western chain as much as 20 to 25 knots. So turbulence really isn't much of a problem right now across the Chukchi Seacoast below 4,000 feet and across the central chain below 4,000 feet. Light to isolated moderate might be the worst you see at this point. And again, we're watching for thunderstorms across the interior. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll have an updated ice image for you here in just a minute with the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned.
One of them beautiful days.
More time you hear these seagulls all the time, you know. But there was none that day.
It was spooky quiet.
I looked down and there was a box of 22 shells, and I said, wow. I reached down and picked those up, and I said, man, this is going to be my lucky day.
We were just about ready to make the set when we felt this tapping vibration in the bottom of the skiff.
You know, we heard this rolling rumble.
We didn't know what it was, because it was severe.
And it started rolling. And it was just like that first.
You got to remember, this is during the Cold War.
my immediate thought for the nuked Anchorage.
It was just awesome. All hell broke loose and the ground started rocking and rolling. And my little buddy told me, "Earthquake, run." So we started running.
The earth was opening up right across the street, right in front of me, and black water was shooting up in the air about, I would say, 15 to 30 feet.
The tops of the phone poles snapping off.
The trees were whipping back and forth.
And it just kept right on a shaking. And as it got further along, it was worse.
As we stood there on the corner, the first of the Standard Oil tanks began to explode.
Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of gallons of fuel that were burning.
And it burned and burned and burned. It was light as day that night, except for the black soot that was falling.
March 27, 1964. Alaska had experienced the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in North America. The magnitude 9.2 quake left Anchorage and other communities devastated. And although there would be aftershocks for weeks, for most of Alaska, the worst was over. But for many coastal communities, the horror was only beginning. The mega-scale earthquake sent multiple killer tsunamis onto Alaska's shores. Most fatalities occurred in Seward, Valdez, and Kodiak.
The channel completely emptied out. You could actually see the bottom of the channel.
And we should have realized, I guess, that the water was going to come in rapidly, but we were fairly ignorant of tsunamis.
No cresting wave. It was just this huge surge that came up and took what boats were left in the harbor and basically rolled them around town.
So it come way up in and washed all of the town out down below, just everything.
Turned and started running, and it happened about as fast as I just told you.
When the water went back out, it went down through the channel, just whoosh.
It may have been like 20 or 30 knots of current going through that channel. It's incredible.
Of man in a boat with no oars or nothing. He was just sitting there, probably just paralyzed, you know. And he was going round and round.
Over 30 people died on Kodiak Island. It's relatively sparsely populated. It happened at a time of day when most people were away from the harbor and the businesses downtown. They were at home already. And if it had happened earlier, the loss of life would have been a lot higher.
Kodiak's devastation was caused by the main tsunami wave that was triggered out in the Gulf of Alaska. But Seward experienced a phenomenon called local tsunamis, which were generated by landslides in nearby Resurrection Bay. These waves were far more dangerous than the main tsunami, which struck later. Bob Eads and his brother were south of town on Lowell Point when the first locally generated wave hit.
The first wave came in way over in that direction. That's when the ocean was boiling with them big boils there, and it went clear over 4th of July at treetop level over there and clear around to the head of the bay, clear out to the airport, and clear into the small boat harbor, and then headed toward Mount Marathon and took the small boat harbor out.
Bob and his brother jumped into their pickup truck and tried to escape.
I couldn't outrun it, and it overtook us, and we was under about 15 feet of water. That covers up, and it got awful dark, blacker than the inside of a goat, you know. We thought, well, it's just about the end. And then we seen the daylight come. The water went down and back out.
The brothers miraculously survived, But what no one knew was that the main tsunami from the Gulf was bearing down on Seward.
The water just completely emptied right out of the bay. You couldn't see anything.
Resurrection Bay is approximately 900 feet deep, and what just startled me looking out there was no water, absolutely no water as far as you can see. The bay is 18 miles deep and 2 to 3 miles wide, and I could see no water at all. And I commented to my dad about it, and that should have been our warning sign to turn around and get out of there, but we didn't.
Coming back into the bay was this big swell. I mean, great big swell. And it wasn't a round one like it went out. It was combing at the top.
And somebody screaming, "Get out, get out. Tsunami coming, tidal wave coming. Get out, go to high ground."
It was this barge, and it had a big crane right at the back of it. It was just like a skier, and he was just skiing right going out of town with this big swell. And as I went around the corner and started up the hill, well, the box cars and the railroad tracks or railroad cars hit me right in the back of the wrecker, and I would say probably pushed me up the hill about 20 or 30 feet.
By then, Doug McRae and his family had scrambled onto the roof of their house.
We took a wild ride. It was like a surf ride. There was power lines that we were worried about getting scraped off the roof. Those tree limbs, and we were spinning and bouncing off trees. And this one, I'm just guessing maybe 10 minutes. And we got wedged in amongst some big trees, big cottonwood trees.
Power had gone off, the sewers were gone, the water was gone. There was absolutely nothing left in the way of utilities.
All the docks had completely disappeared. There's just a few stumps sticking up there. It's really a mess. And basically for us, Seward was gone because our livelihood was gone, our employment was gone, the canneries were gone.
And finally I turned to my mother and said to her, "Well, Mom, there goes your All-America City." And we laughed.
All right, here's a look at today's Sea Ice Edge. You can always get this information anytime by going to weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. And the only remaining nearshore ice that we have is this 30 nautical mile strip, or even less, of rotting sea ice that's just to the north and east of Prudhoe Bay. So the area that is analyzed is probably actually a little bit bigger than the ice that's actually offshore, but they've drawn it in to encompass all the little tiny bits that start coming off of that, so you don't think it's actually a lot smaller than it is. So here's where it is, and apparently this is causing some navigational issues, I guess, around going into Prudhoe Bay or along the coastline there. But it's not very big, so you can keep track of this. It will be analyzed again tomorrow easily by using our website, or we'll show you the latest image right here in Alaska Weather. Here's a look at Wednesday's marine forecast in southeast. Wind speeds pretty light, 10 to 15 knots or so in the inner waterways, 2 to 3 foot seas. Remember, there's going to be some fog again in the morning, it looks like, just like what you saw this morning. A northwesterly flow, fairly light along the coast, only 15 knots, 4 to 5 foot seas there wrapping around high pressure. Some areas will see a little bit of a change going into Thursday, more of a southeasterly flow around Yakutat. Otherwise, a north and northwesterly flow expected. For most areas between 10 knots in the inner waterways and 15 to 20 knots along the coast, with 4 to 5 foot seas in those areas and 2 foot seas on the inside. Across south central, a light and variable flow in just about most areas, especially in the western and northern Gulf. Across Shelikof Strait and Cook Inlet, look for 10 knots from the south and west, 2 foot seas there. Also east of the Barrens, coming in from the west at 10 knots and off of Kodiak Island with a 3 foot sea. That comes up a little bit more to 15 knots by Thursday. Light and variable winds and small seas continue inside and outside of Prince William Sound and Resurrection Bay. Southwesterlies continue for Shelikof Strait and the Cook Inlet. West of the Barrens, still looking at 10 knots with a 2 foot sea on Thursday. For the Alaska Peninsula, light and variable winds on the north side, otherwise a little bit more northerly as you get into Bristol Bay. A southeasterly flow coming in from the Pacific side with seas between 10 and 4 feet with a 10-knot flow. By Thursday, light and variable winds, 1 foot seas there inside of Bristol Bay, 3 foot seas, and you get south and west of Kodiak. And north of Cold Bay, still looking at small seas there, so high pressure firmly in control of the seas as we get around the Alaska Peninsula. On Wednesday, a little bit west of that high pressure center, you get more of a south and easterly flow, 10, 15, even 25 knots there north of the central chain, 5, 6, and 8 foot seas there on the Pacific side with 15-knot flow, and more of a variable flow east of Shemya. The winds will be a little bit more northerly as you get west of the island. As you get into Thursday, northerlies take over there from 15 knots with a 5-foot sea. Southeasterlies by and large for most of the central chain. One exception from Unalaska, north and south, and to Nikolsky, about 15 knots generally from the east, with 4 to 5 foot seas expected there, as high as 8-foot seas south of Adak and Atka on Thursday. For the west coast, a south and westerly flow from St. Lawrence Island off of the YK coastline, variable flow north of Nunivak Island, more of a light northerly flow south of Mokoriak and into the Kuskokwim Delta. Southeasterlies around the Pribilofs with 3-foot seas there, and for the St. Matthew Island waters, those winds could be as high as 15 knots with a 6-foot sea on Wednesday. By Thursday, that's coming up even more to 20 knots. Southerlies continue for St. Lawrence Island, and offshore flow develops from Hooper Bay down through Mokoriak and the Kuskokwim Delta. 2-foot seas expected there, and that easterly flow continues across the Pribilofs for St. Paul and St. George. A 3-foot sea is expected on the inside waters. On the Arctic coast for Wednesday, a southerly flow will be the main order of the day, south and west of Barrow from about 15 to 20 knots, 3 to 4-foot seas for most areas, with a very light easterly flow coming across the Beaufort seacoast. 10 to 15 knots on Thursday with seas around 2 to 3 feet, and southwesterlies continue up the Chukchi seacoast at 15 knots with seas ranging from 3 to 4 feet. Recapping tonight's weather, showers and thunderstorms may form more over mountain areas than anywhere else tonight for south central, a little bit more into the interior along the Yukon Valley and west. Expect a better chance for some showers, becoming a little bit more of rain as you get into Norton Sound. Showers are expected across the Brooks Range. For southeast, though, look for more of a drier night with areas of fog setting up by early morning thanks to high pressure to your north. A storm south of southeastern Alaska and the Gulf will continue trekking eastward, making way for another storm we'll watch as we get toward the end of the week. In the meantime, the Aleutian storm here is just fighting its way through a ridge of high pressure anchored across the west coast, keeping fog in place and winds fairly light for southwest and Kodiak Island. Showers and storms pop up again across the interior tomorrow. They wane away for Thursday, leaving a drier day for many in the west and in the south. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.